This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm your host, Mike Rapin, and joining me this week, my friend from the local comic book shop, Paloma Deerfield.
Hello, hello, hello.
And some cool guy over in France, Conor McCreery.
Bonjour.
Conor, thank you so much for joining me this week. Thank you, Paloma, as well. I'm very excited to chat comics with you. I think later in the episode, we're going to chat with your co-conspirator on this book that you had that came out earlier this month, Fela. But for now, for the folks at home who maybe don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and what you've been up to?
For sure. My name is Conor McCreery. I'm a Canadian comic book creator who happens to, yes, be living in France right now. I formally started my career in comics, probably like 15 years ago when I started a series called Kill Shakespeare with Anthony Delcall and Andy Boulanger, which was kind of a weird Shakespearean mashup, imagining what if all of Shakespeare's characters lived in the same world, except for Hamlet, and he was sucked into this world and was sent on a quest to end all tragedy by tracking down and killing the father of all tragedy, the evil wizard, William Shakespeare. And so in the very small Venn diagram of Shakespeare fans and comic lovers, we were kings. So that's a series that's ongoing. Actually, we just released a new book in the series late last year, if I'm getting my dates right. And we've actually reissued the first 5 volumes in a couple of folios. The first one's out, the second one's coming. I also did some stuff for Assassin's Creed, Adventure Time, a regular show, Sherlock Holmes versus Harry Houdini. And then I have a couple of other creator-owned projects. The Last Witch, which is a series with Boom, which is kind of, I guess, is like Irish Avatar, The Last Airbender, with just the right amount of child cannibalism. Because you're going to have witches and none of them try to eat a kid. They might just be Estonian. Like, they may not be doing a spell. That could just be the local language, right? So
sure.
And then beyond that, I've got a series called Trickster, which we did release of the first issue with Twisted Pub, which is a boutique publisher in the UK. And the full trade is going to be coming out early next year. And also, as we're talking about, Fela, Music is the Weapon, which is a book that myself and Jibola have done with Harper Collins, which came out about a month ago. And we're really excited about that one. That was about a 8-year labor with Jibola and I, from kind of where we first really started working on it to seeing it come out and actually getting it in our hands.
Conor, I really have to say, Fela was such an impressive book. I'm so excited to talk about it later. I think hopefully Jibola will be able to join us for that part. But unfortunately, I have to stop talking about your books and I have to ask 2 legally mandated questions. And that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? And I'm going to just kick right back to you, Conor. What have you been reading? What's been up?
I mean, I've been pretty good. I think comic books have been great. I think we're in a really interesting time in comics. I've been chatting with a lot of people about how they feel like we're seeing the effects of Dogman, meaning that like all these younger readers who grew up with graphic novels, and some of them have gone manga, which is great. And some of them but I think there was this like little window where people were like, oh man, are people going to read North American style comics anymore? Is it just eventually going to move to manga? Not that that's really a problem, but I mean, as someone who is not a manga artist, that is, a bit of a concern for me.
A little of a problem. Yeah.
Petit peu. But I was chatting with some people. They're like, no, we're seeing the kids who are into Dogman are now in their first jobs. They like physical media because, they of course are digital natives. And so the idea of owning physical books and comics especially is really appealing to them. So I think we're in this great time. And what I am reading, though, is really nothing to do with that. So I am in France. France has a long history of BD. In France, it's really cool. There's about 4 BD shops, all owned by the same company, about a 10-minute walk from me. And there's like an entire BD shop that's just for romance, an entire BD shop that's just for horror, an entire one for manga. And so I picked up something called World Without End. There's an English translation, which is what I'm reading. And it is this really interesting conversation about the history of humanity and energy consumption. So a lot of it does focus on right now with the amount of oil and gas we use. And it talks about, it has a theory about economies and why they expand. And it's really to do with energy as opposed to anything else. It's a really smart but very accessible book that talks about our addiction to oil, what that means, how much things have changed from, say, the 20s to the 60s to now. I was going to say the 90s, but that makes that feel like in period way back when in the 90s was when I was a kid, and I don't think I
Right.
can deal with that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's great cartoonist. It's very funny at times, and of course now I'm blanking on the name of the cartoonist who did it, but it's a really interesting book, and anybody who likes kind of Joe Sacco, or has a taste for comics that are trying to grapple with real world issues without being super preachy, I think this is I've really enjoyed it. It's a really interesting book. I cannot read too much of it though, because it is a little low key terrifying as you go through and
Sure.
look how things are going. But it is it is also though a hopeful book that talking about we do have a lot of choices to satisfy our needs for energy, and this is not new news to anybody, but it is interesting to see just how they discuss it, and also to get it from a French perspective, which of course, France is not a oil producing nation. They have a completely different relationship to fossil fuels than we do in North America, where of course in Canada, the United States, we produce a lot of fossil fuels. And so it's kind of interesting to get that perspective and to see that viewpoint. So yeah, that's what I'm reading, World Without End. Great book, really enjoying it.
That's sounds you've piqued my interest, and I
Yeah.
never considered the perspective of like France is not an oil producing nation, so like their perspective is going to be drastically different, because I live in America, like I understand, like we've got pipelines and Texas is full of holes and all this other stuff. It's just like, oh, oil's just a part of life, and it's like not for everybody. Like get out of your own head, Mike, come on. That's fantastic. I'm curious though, like how easy is it for you to find English translated comics where you are in France?
You can find some for sure. I mean, again, there's a ton. Like when you go to the town I'm in is a little town called Annecy or Annecy, depending on my English butchering of the actual town name.
Sure.
So if you actually go to the tourist, like the tourist center, there's a big Bay Day store in the tourist center, right? Like people love Bay Day and comics here. So
Yeah.
a bunch of the Bay Day shops, you can find some English work. Most of it is big two, I would say, although there are
Sure.
some image titles that also have English translation. But it's interesting because, in the French market, because they have so many comics, and that is such a strong culture for comics, that, people generally just translate the book into French because you have a market for it and you will get enough people buying it. If anything, I think it's way more likely to see. I used to work at in a comic shop for many years. I was manager of a comic shop when I was younger, and we would get a lot of French. We were just starting to get a lot of the French translations, or French books that were translated into English. And so I think there's still more traffic kind of going from France to North America, French to English, then English to French. But
Okay.
if you go to any big shop, though, you can definitely find all the major books, but most of them are going to be translated into French. You don't get a ton of English language books, so it is a bit of a trick.
Gotcha. I imagine I'm imagining like some French underground shop that's just like, hey, I got the good American stuff here, as you're getting like Boom Comics and Oni Comics published in English. But that's just me having fun. But Paloma, let's move on. I'm curious to know, how have you been? How have comic books been? What have you been reading?
I've been great. Comics have been amazing. I'm certainly in agreement there. It feels like not a renaissance, but just floppies are moving and bringing people in who've never held a floppy before. And
Interesting.
I love that.
Are you seeing that more frequently in your shop?
Yeah, we get a lot of people that are like, I heard about this. Typically, it's big two stuff that brings people in, with the exception of like now Invincible Battle Beast. But
sure.
a lot of people see like YouTube summaries. A lot of stuff on YouTube kind of brings people like summaries of what's going on in comics, brings people in. So I find that quite fascinating, because it's like, this is not an audio medium.
So what you're saying is we need to pivot the show into a YouTube summary channel, so we can get more people reading comics that we think are really good. I like this. This is
Honestly, yeah.
Okay, cool.
But what I read most recently, big jump away from planet Earth, and that is Starship Godzilla #1.
Ooh.
It's part of It's from IDW, written by Chris Gooch, art by Oliver Ono, and letters by Hassan Otsmane Elhau. And it's part of this new IDW kind of like revamping their Godzilla titles, and it's part of this Kaisei universe. And this is kind of like the third book in that universe so far.
Mm-hmm.
Quick summary. This takes place in outer space, where the previous two series, Godzilla Escaped the Dead Zone, they're focused on the happenings of Earth. But kaiju are universal. So it follows this
Cool.
team. They fly a giant Godzilla-looking spaceship, starship, excuse me, hence Starship Godzilla. And they kind of just do a lot of heists, maybe stop some kaiju, and we're following this crew that gets hold of some kaiju eggs. I haven't seen Alien, but it seems very alien-like because an egg hatches and kind of just goes from there. I'm very stoked to read the next issue when that comes out. It's like a bottle episode of TV, but it's heightened because people are trapped with this creature, but also there's whimsy. The art by Oliver Ono, so good. Definitely has like that kind of more like manga style influence. He previously did art for Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp, and I'd read that, just a fun time, kind of like all ages young adult book, but I'm very stoked for more.
Awesome. I remember this being like all the hype near the IDW booth at New York City Comic Con this year. Like they did a special cover, and I was like, this looks like the coolest Godzilla book I've ever seen. And I for some reason did not sit down to read it, even though IDW sent us a copy. So like, what am I doing? It sounds like I need to get on this Godzilla hype train. I know Danny, who's a regular on the show, he's very on the Godzilla hype train. I think now hearing it from two sources, this is just justification. I need to finally actually get on the Godzilla train. That sounds awesome. I'll have to check this out. But for me, things have been very busy as I've just been moving things around in my house. And I think we finally got our house like settled, which is very nice for the first time in like 8 months. It feels very nice. Like we're no longer like swapping furniture and redoing floors and painting and stuff. So like that feels really nice. And yeah, I did sit down and read a bunch of comics. I read a copy of Fela that Conor sent over, so thank you, and I'm excited to talk about that later. But I also read this book that I received in the mail from a Kickstarter that I backed called The Corus Wave. This is by Karenza Sparks. It's from Avery Hill Publishing. They're based out of South London, so Conor, maybe you could get a copy of this book. It's pretty cool. But yeah, this book showed up in the mail, and I remember seeing the Kickstarter and going, oh, Avery Hill Press, they like pretty much don't publish bad comics. Everything I read from them has been amazing. And this book looks really, really cute. And it turns out it is a really, really cute book, as it follows this woman, Lorelei, and her roommate Eddie as they investigate this quote unquote Corus Wave, hesitantly talked about phenomenon affecting fossils that Lorelei is studying. She's like a geology student. And as they dig deeper into the person who coined the term Corus Wave, a 19th century polymath named Habeas Corus, which is weirdly close to the name habeas corpus. Yes. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but they discovered that there may be more than science to what they're investigating, which is like a very interesting idea as we get into this totally fictionalized story about these two people just investigating this weird science thing. And it feels almost like a mystery novel aimed at younger readers, where there's like a Nancy Drew or like a Hardy Boys thing to it, as they kind of discover like this guy was obsessed with this idea of how these fossils form, and no one in science has been able to explain how like the silica of these fossils are formed in this weird wave. And the mystery unfolds as the story goes on. And I was sitting there thinking like, this is a work of fiction, but like the way that Sparks like describes all of the science behind things, it feels almost so close to reality that I'm like, I had to Google multiple times, is this a real thing? Is like resonance to like silica actually a thing that like happens? And it kind of is. So like I really like that like Sparks clearly had this love of geology and turned it into this nice little story about this woman trying to basically write her a thesis paper, I think, about this Corus Wave thing, and digging into this esoteric science that was like pushed off to the side because the person who claimed that this was a real thing kind of fell into a religious fervor. And like, it's a really interesting book. It's very cutesy. It's very like fun and animated in a lot of ways, but you can tell that Sparks is like trying to pay homage to like the 18th and 19th century like architecture of small London towns, as like while they draw in this very cartoony style, when they draw architecture and cityscapes, you can tell that like they're not trying to draw like a cartoon background. They're really trying to make it look real. So I really appreciated that balance between things. And again, there's this fun like every page and every chunk of the story kind of unravels more of the mystery. We're constantly pulling on this thread of like what actually is going on here. And by the end of the book, I was like, that's just a nice book. I would love to give this to like a 12-year-old. I think they'd have a really good time, but I'd also give it to like a 50-year-old. And I think they would also think, oh, this is just a sweet, fun little story. So if you get a chance, check out the Corus Wave from Avery Hill Press. This is such, or Avery Hill Publishing, excuse me. It's just a fantastic little book. And I have to like sit, like, I think I'm 5 out of 5 on the last Avery Hill Press books or publishing books that I've picked up. So like, if you see a Kickstarter come out from Avery Hill, and they do one pretty much every quarter, you should back it and then buy any of their books as editions, because it's such like a cool thing where they're like, we're funding a book, but we're also allowing you to buy anything from our back catalog, and we'll like condense all the shipping to get it to you, because I think they're shipping out of London. So like, I don't know, I really, really like this book, and I can't recommend it enough. You just want something quick and easy. I read this in like 2 or 3 sittings because the book is broken into nice little chunks. It was such a fun read, so I highly recommend this. Do you guys have you read any other books from Avery Hill Publishing? I know I've talked about them a bunch on the show, but like Conor, Paloma, either of you?
I'm just looking here. I'm like, I know the name, and I'm like, have I come across one of their books and not realized it? Although that sounds fantastic, because I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old in the household, as well as a 5-year-old, but he doesn't count for this conversation. Sorry, Pierce.
Sure.
He's not ready for these Avery Hill books. But I'm trying to think, like, have I read anything by Avery Hill? I feel like I've seen something. I don't know.
I can't think of like any books that I'm like, oh, this was the big hit from them, because in my mind, I'm like, I backed one of them on Kickstarter because a book looked cool. And then I just keep getting their emails and they're just like, hey, we got a new book coming out. So I'm just like, I read everything of theirs, or that I can get my hands on for the most part. But
their stuff looks familiar, but I don't know if I've read it. I've definitely seen them on shelves though. This Corus Wave sounds awesome.
Yeah, I really think, like, I don't know. It's such a fun little book. I mean, like, the book that I think really got me hooked was like The Hard Switch by Owen D. Pomeroy. Okay. But go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just looking through and I was like, oh, they did some of Tilly Walden stuff.
Yes, they also, Tilly Walden stuff. Yeah.
They did some of Tilly Walden. I was like, I know I've seen Avery Hill stuff. I used to help when Miami Book Fair used to have a big comics part of the festival. I was one of the people who got to help curate the festival, and so we brought Tilly Walden in kind of really early on. And I was like, I know an Avery Hill, but that's okay. I mean, then was taking a quick look at their website. I'm like, wow, all these look like incredibly interesting. Like, so you can tell they're all like just driven by this individual who just has this like unique story and point of view, and that Avery Hill's just like, doesn't matter what it is, if it's unique and it's got like this really clear vision, we're in. So yes, I'm gonna have to. I'm not so far. I've got a friend of mine who is in London. I may send him by and be like, look, just grab me some Avery Hill. I got to go visit there too. So there we go.
This episode sponsored by Avery Hill Publishing. No, I'm glad. That's great to hear. Yeah, I forgot. They did like On a Sunbeam. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. I'm looking through their catalog now. I'm like, oh, right. I probably got hooked on this a long time ago and I just forgot. But yeah, their Kickstarters are great. Highly recommend that. But before we continue to just spread even more love for this publisher, let's move on. Let's talk about comic books that are on the top of our pile, whether they are new or old or something you're just trying to get off your shelf. I do want to shout out a handful of folks that are hanging out with us live today on Discord. Jeff is going to be reading Star Trek number 19 from the 2022 series. Danny's going to be reading Batman Dark Patterns number 12. And Paul G is going to be reading Akane Banashi for the Goodreads Challenge, which shout out the IRCB Goodreads Challenge right now. We've got an incredible list of books that people have picked from our Patreon, as well as everyone on the show picked a book, or most people on the show picked a book. That's ending on December 16th. So if you haven't read the 22 or 24 books that we had on the list, you should get started. You've got a month. I think it's possible. You could totally finish it if you start right now. But Conor, what is on the top of your pile? What is a comic book that you want to be reading next?
I mean, so there's a couple ones. One is the Life Drawing by Jaime Hernandez. I was a huge Love and Rockets fan growing up. It was one of those things. So I mentioned I worked at a comic shop. I kind of, like a lot of people, fell out of comics, right? I was told, hey, you can read them when you're a kid, but now that you're older, you need to move on to prose, and you leave childish things behind. And it wasn't until I worked at this comic shop that they were handing me everything because, of course, they're trying to get me read in so I can make sure I'm making good recommendations to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I had been aware of when I was a kid, because I knew the band Love and Rockets, but I didn't, the book was not really for me. I'm like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, right?
Sure.
And so later in life, in my 20s, I come into Love and Rockets and just fall deeply in love with it. And I've now found that, partially being in France the last couple of years, getting access to floppies is not as easy. And so when I saw that they've got this, life drawing, at first I'm like, oh, it's an art book. That's pretty cool. I like art books. I'm not an art book like super fan, but like
Sure.
for the right artist. But then I saw that there's like a lot of behind the scenes, and there's actually like reprints of a lot of the stuff that Jaime's been doing for the last couple of years. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to learn so much, and I'm going to get caught up on a bunch of the most recent stuff that Jaime's been doing. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also a Joe Sacco super fan. And so he's got, I guess he's got War on Gaza, and then he's got the Once and Future Riot. I think those are the two titles. Those are both kind of in my cart, but I've sort of promised myself I've got to finish the other books, because when we moved from Canada, I had like a huge stack of graphic novels that I hadn't finished, like all of us do. And I was like, I can't bring, like, it's too expensive to bring
Sure.
these things over for them to now sit in a giant pile on my bedside table in France.
Right.
So when I go back to, I'm back in Canada, relatively often. So I slowly work my way through that. But that pile, like, I don't know, there's a bunch of Valiant books in there. It's a weird grab bag of all sorts of crazy stuff that I just, literally, some of it has probably been sitting there for years. You guys
Sure.
know how it is.
Yeah,
some
yeah,
things
yeah.
move up the pile and some things get buried, but you're going to read all of them. Gosh darn it.
Listen, I have this is the problem that I had with Comixology back in the day. Was it's just like, I'm going to buy all the books on this sale, and then I'm going to read all through Alan Moore's Swamp Thing for sure this summer. And it's like, that book is still sitting in my digital to read pile, let alone the literal full shelf of a Calyx bookshelf that I have that is just full of graphic novels that is now spilled over to a second shelf on that Calyx bookshelf. I feel you. Paloma, I imagine you've read all your books. You're up to date, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I don't have like subs from last year that I'm sitting on.
Well, I'm very excited for you to get caught up this upcoming winter break or something. I don't know.
Oh,
We're all still in elementary school. We're gonna have 4 weeks off where we can read comics. But Paloma, why don't you tell us what is on the top of your pile before I continue to be ridiculous?
Top of my pile is something just simple and easy. It's Batman #3 by Matt Fraction, art by Jorge Jimenez. Yeah, I didn't realize I had to read that the day of release before I got spoiled on, not spoiled, but I'm like, why are all these scenes appearing online? It just came out. That's not fair. I like to read my subscription books when I get home. I don't have this yet, but I've been liking I'm a Batman super fan. That guy just has me. And I've been really liking Matt Fraction's take. I do like how each issue is kind of just like letting you in. That's like, I think Matt Fraction said that is like his intention is each issue can be like standalone in a sense. Love Jorge Jimenez's art. It's just a good time. Batman, it just feels like a good time to like Batman. I feel like they're not part of it is they're just like Batman's easy money, but part of it is like, this is good Batman stuff right now. Like Danny reading I think the last issue maybe of Dark Patterns. I haven't read it yet, but I hear so many good things about that like limited series. So it's just a good time for Batman stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like it ebbs and flows between Spider-Man and Batman, and right now Batman is like on the super rise, and I don't know if they'll ever be able to come down from it, because we've got Absolute Batman, we've got this Batman run, we've got the 4 or 5 other Batman miniseries that are literally just like all very good. Like every single one I've tried has been amazing. I don't know how Marvel competes. It's a real problem for them. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to this issue as well. This is the first time I've actually pulled a Batman book in my entire life.
What?
I was like, Matt Fraction on Batman. I can't miss another Matt Fraction DC book, right? Like I missed the Jimmy Olsen run that he did. And it may be one of the funniest, most fun standalone DC books you can read, right? So I'm like, I can't miss this Batman, right? I know it's not going to be fun and easy, but like there's a point of it or part of it that's like kind of funny how stupidly stoic Batman is in this book. So like I'm having a lot of fun with it. Once it gets over to you in France, Connor, you're going to have to let us know what you think about it. If you're not reading it online, I don't know if you're a Batman fan or not, but
You know what? I am a Batman fan. It's for me. It's funny you mention it because it's Batman and Spider-Man. Those are my two.
Oh, okay.
those are my two. Normally I'm more of a Marvel kid growing up. I was a big Speedball, New Warriors fan. But yeah, I
Wow.
remember. Oh yeah. Way back in the machine.
Sure.
But I remember picking up. I mean, The Killing Joke when I was a kid, and like that, not prepared for that. Really
Right.
not prepared for that.
As a kid, that's the craziest pull you
yeah.
could have had as a kid.
Yeah, I think I was probably like 12 or something. Like, no, that was a big mistake. I don't know why they let me take that book out of the store. And then I remember like The Killing Joke, or sorry, not The Killing, I just said that, like Long Halloween, stuff like that. Like those were a lot of the formative books for me. And then I just love Spider-Man, right? I mean, Spider-Man was just always, you could just, I as a kid, comic shops, when I remember looking at, there weren't that many around. So there was literally going to the drugstore, and I vividly remember getting the three of the, I think it was a 5-issue miniseries, the Gang War, Spider-Man Gang War, where they had all the very, like the Chameleon and Flathead and everything. And I just remember, like, I think I had episodes or issues 1, 2, and 4. So like I just never found out how it ended, right? Because it just you missed it. It just does. They just didn't get it in for some reason. Whoever ran the comics part, that probably got fired, took a vacation. Somebody else was like, I don't know what the hell to order. Like, Archie. Well, let's get more Archie in here.
Sure.
So I have these vivid memories of all these Spider-Man runs that I was super invested in, but could only get like 65% of the run. But I do, one of my all-time favorites, though, and this not a lot of people seem to remember it, but the people who do absolutely loved it, was the Spider-Man versus Wolverine book, where Spider-Man goes to Berlin. So Wolverine, there is a CIA agent named Charlie. They have been blown, and they are deciding that they are going to wipe out as many enemy agents as they can before they get got, because their cover's been blown. And they are a close friend of Wolverine. So Wolverine has gone to Berlin to try to help them, / maybe it's kinder for Wolverine to take them out rather than to let the KGB or the Stasi get them. And Spider-Man happens, Peter Parker happens to be in Germany for a photo assignment, and he comes across Wolverine, and it's sort of early. And so Wolverine is sort of this, like, he knows he's this sort of psychotic killer character, and he just doesn't know the context of what's going on. And there's a great fight between the two of them in a cemetery. And it was one of my favorite things because, the instinct is, Wolverine's this unstoppable killing machine. It's not even a fight. But of course, Spider-Man is just he's so fast.
Right,
and of course, he's always pulling his punches. And so this is a book where, it's not the only time it's been done, but for me, it was the first time I encountered the idea of Peter Parker letting the limits go. And of course, he's got to fight his absolute best fight because Wolverine can skewer him. And so I remember just I love that comic, 2 pieces. One of the favorite things, it was such a formative book for me as a kid. I really enjoyed it.
Wow. I just found like a fandom wiki that has like a cover of Wolverine and Spider-Man fighting. That looks like a lot of fun. 1987 is the date they're putting on that book. Oh my gosh.
I old.
No, that's okay. I'm not trying to like point and say, look at the old man reading comics. I'm mostly just like, it's crazy to think that we've been doing these versus type books for like 40 years. It's crazy. That sounds, I'm gonna have to check that out at Marvel Unlimited or something. But let me talk really quick about a book that I'm excited to read next. And this may be obvious to anyone who listens to the show or anyone who just is reading modern comics. Die Loaded #1 from Image Comics. This is from Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans, based a sequel series to the Die series that they had come out a short while ago about the what's been described as by Kieran as goth Jumanji, where a bunch of 40-somethings get sucked into a game that they played 15-20 years ago, and they have to figure out why that happens. And it's very interesting. I will say, if you have not read the first series, do not pick this one up because it fully spoils a major plot point, at least in the first arc of the original Die. Go read that Die series. It's very short. It's 20 issues long. It's fantastic. If you love tabletop RPGs, if you love good dramatic character-based stories, you will love Die. If you manage to get the single issues, like if you read them on Comixology, rest in peace, or if you read it on the hopefully new Sweet Shop that's coming out very soon from our good friend Kenny, you can hopefully get the back matter of those issues where Kieran wrote these beautiful essays about his thoughts about tabletop RPGs and how that informed the way that he was writing the series. So go read the original Die. I recommend everybody to do that. This is like a Mike Rapin guarantee. If you don't like it, I'll refund your purchase type of thing. Go read that and then pick up this new Die Loaded. It's going to be fantastic. I think if it's continuing the series, very curious to know. I think the synopsis kind of, again, spoils things, but I'm very excited to know the premise. And I know we've got a comp from Image, so I'm probably going to read that literally right after we finish recording today. But I'm obviously way in. I did a reread of this series before the last arc of Die came out, and I remember being just like continuously blown away, but a little disappointed in like the fast sum up. So I'm glad to know that we're getting more of this series in just to hopefully wrap up some of the pieces that I felt weren't completely touched on at the end of the first run. So that's what I'm up to. Very excited. Connor, have you heard of this series?
Mike, I bought the blind bag gold stamp foil signed edition. It was about $9,500. I really actually didn't like it that much, but so you can just send the check. No worries.
Yes, yeah. I can send that much over Venmo internationally, right? They're fine with that. Oh, brother. I'm waiting for someone to finally take me up on that. I will say, I think that my track record is actually pretty good in terms of recommending people comics like that, because I don't like to put my money on the line that hard, or that often. But like, quite honestly, I recommend good comics, and I'm just going to hold on to that for the rest of my life. But I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I think we're going to talk to Conor and Jibola about this book Fela that they put together. So we'll be back in just a second. We are back for the second half of our show, where we are talking with not only Conor McCreery, but his co-conspirator that I alluded to earlier in the episode, Jibola Fagbamiye. Thank you both for joining me. I'm super excited to chat here. We got some questions for you about this new book that you guys put out here in October called Fela Kuti, Music is the Weapon. I guess, Jibola, you were here in the first half of the show. Could you tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you've been working on?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Jibola. I actually grew up in Nigeria, and I grew up not too far from Fela Kuti's house, and that would matter in a bit. And I've been drawing my whole life. I've been painting for as long as I can remember, and I got really obsessed about writing a book about Fela, and decided to, I read this book and just got sucked into it. And I met Conor, and I pitched the idea to him. I was able to convince him, and we were able to work on this project together. But yeah, that's kind of like a pretty short story about me and how I got involved in the project.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, I think in the prelude to the book, there's some discussion of that, and I think like such a cool like story about someone that I never knew about. I mean, like, I think I had heard Fela's music before, but I didn't know the like connection in the history. But I guess the first question here, Paloma, I guess I'll turn over to you because I love doing all the talking. So like, get us into asking these guys some questions about this book, please.
Well, I guess kind of to set the scene, my question here. Absolutely loved this graphic novel. Thanks for like collaborating, putting this together. I'd only like heard of Fela Kuti just like in his titles, like the father of Afrobeat, and kind of nothing much else. This was just kind of like told to me chatting with friends about music, and I was like, that's so cool. And I had no idea kind of like the context of like how his music, like when his music was being made, how he like developed as an artist. So awesome to read this. And so I guess my real question is more so about the music, and just which albums or songs of like Fela Kuti's would you recommend to readers like myself who like finish this book and is like, wow, where do I start to like get into his discography, which I think in like the introduction was like describes like just like massive.
Yeah. I think the easiest one to get into is Zombie, right? Which we featured pretty heavily in the book, because when he recorded that song, it was a pivotal time in his career and in his life. So it's a pivotal time in the story as well. But it's just a very easy song to get into. And then another really easy one is Wata no Get Enemy, which is kind of like a little bit more softer and spiritual sounding music. And there is typically Fela songs are about 20, it's like 10 to 30 minutes long. So once you've gotten through like your zombie and what I know get enemy, and you want something heavier and deeper, you can listen to Look and Laugh, which is my all-time favorite. It takes about 20 minutes to get into actually any vocals, right? But it's this really deep, meditative, groovy sound. And then it's a song that actually talks more about nihilism, actually. But it's so enjoyable to listen to, and those are my top recommendations.
Nice. Conor, did you have any tracks that stood out to you when you were working on this book?
I mean, zombie for sure, because like that's one my kids will put on and listen to. It is like a really super accessible as it goes. But I mean, two other ones that I would say are also pretty accessible. Because I think it's kind of good. It's good to start with just like the 7 to 11 minute song before you dive into literally the half hour. Like at the end of his career, Fela was like, I'm making like African orchestral music, right? Like that was how he saw his music switching. And of course, like orchestral classical music, these are long pieces with multiple movements, and that was what Fela was doing at the end of his career. But a couple of things that would have been earlier. One is Suffering and Smiling, which is a really interesting conversation about, I like to call it the religious industrial complex, and the idea of religion being used as a form of control and as a quasi-government. And so that's a really interesting song. And then there's another one called International Teef Teef, which is another great song. It's about a specific company called ITT in Nigeria, but at a broader context, it's talking about the idea of large corporations and the outsized impact and control that they have. And this was a song that, Fela was singing about in the 70s, which is probably even more relevant today when we look at, what do they call it? The Tech 7 or whatever, the 7 companies that make up the vast value of the American stock market right now, right? So it is still a very relevant concept of this idea of how big should a corporation be, and nothing really good comes when they get too big. So kind of those are a couple of fun ones, but they're both really groovy. They're great to dance to. That's the weird thing about Fela. All his music is really deep, like it's going to make you think, but sometimes you don't realize it because you're too busy shaking your ass.
I have to add one to the list if you guys don't mind. There's one called "You Give Me Shit, I Give You Shit," and it's a story about how, because it was when you started talking about ITT. It's a story about how Fela shit bombed somebody's house. Right?
Excuse me?
Yes.
I didn't read that in the book.
That is not in the book, unfortunately, because there's only so many shit stories we could fit in.
We did expensive shit.
We did expensive shit,
That's true. That's true.
It's the most expensive. Anyway, there's this guy called MKO Abiola, who was the CEO of ITT, which was the company Fela was talking about in that song ITT. Right. Abiola is actually a pretty beloved character in Nigerian history because he ran for president and was really trying to give a lot of people hope. But him and Fela didn't jive. Right. And he actually was trying to get Fela arrested multiple times. So Fela, in one of the scenarios where Fela had occupied MKO's office, that part is in the story. And after all that, after MKO was able to get Fela out, Fela eventually went back to shit bomb his house and totally denied it and said he didn't do it. But in the song "Give Me Shit, I Give You Shit," he literally documents how he firebomb shit bombed this guy's house. But
it's
he
like that
publicly denied it. It's almost like a public sketch, right? So that's a really funny one to listen to.
Oh man, That's see, it's funny. I like scrolling through some of the title tracks. I'm kind of looking through this fella's discography and stuff. I'm like, what could this song possibly be about? And it turns out that a lot of them are just like very to the point. Like this title is actually what this song's about. There's no
not a metaphor,
message
not
for
a lot
some
of metaphor.
them.
A lot of
yeah.
He's so direct, right, in his description.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
We jumped right into the music of Fela. For folks that maybe at home who aren't familiar with Fela Kuti, could you tell us just a little bit about like who they were, in their time, and like what made you, I guess, drawn to telling this story about this person? Maybe Jibola, you could start, and Conor, you could jump in.
Okay, sure. So I think Fela is the closest thing Nigerians have to a real life superhero, right? Because no one really gave a shit about everyday Nigerians, right? Except Fela. And he put his body, his life, reputation on the line very publicly for Nigerians. And that's why a million Nigerians came out when Fela passed away, right? Fela Kuti is kind of he's a Nigerian musician, created this genre of music called Afrobeat, and Afrobeat is this fusion of jazz, funk, and high life and traditional West African sounds, right? And after he created this song, this genre, he went on to marry 27 women in one day, making his total count of wives 28. He created his own country, and he got arrested over 200 times, and he just was really fighting against the Nigerian military regime at the time, which was pre-totalitarian. When they were there. So what makes his story compelling was that you just don't get a lot of stories like this. And even though Fela's massive, is huge, right? There was a Broadway about him, and I still feel that more people don't know enough about Fela, right? And I had read this book called This Bitch of a Life, and when I read it, I became obsessed with telling Fela's story, and I was like, everybody needs to know the story. And then when I saw the play, I was like, oh my God, somebody's going to write a movie about this guy, right? And I was like, the play was a great play, but it sanitized Fela a bit, right? And I thought, well, you can tell the story like just in its full glory, right? Because Fela didn't sanitize himself, so why sanitize it? Just put it all out there. And I became obsessed, and I was like, I want to tell this story, and I think I can tell a better story than the Broadway people did. And when I started writing it, I realized, oh shit, I don't know how to write, So, and I done all this research, but I didn't know how to connect all these stories together. And the way Nigerians tell stories, there's magic in our stories, there's fantasy in there. Obviously this is a story about Black liberation and politics and music and all these things, right? So I didn't want it to be just this linear cradle to grave story. I wanted to have all these layers, and I had it all there, but just didn't know how to put the pieces together. And I had known Conor for years, so I reached out to him and, gave him, I actually just asked for notes, like, hey, can you just give me some guidance?
Sure.
And he's a phenomenal writer. And, I'd read Kill Shakespeare. And so when I reached out to him, I was just expecting some notes, dude. And he came back with these really thoughtful, beautiful notes that I was like, can you just write it? And that's how we started working together. But then my plan was to write maybe like an 100 page graphic novel, and Conor came back with 300.
Hey, it was 350. Let's not overstate the point. It was 350. It grew to 360 later. But the first draft was a lean, tight 350 pages.
It was
never 380. You're just making stuff up.
Cutting. Anyway, my mission throughout the whole project was trying to cut it. But then I didn't know what to cut because it was so awesome.
The mission, because Jibola would come in, he would always be like...
That's kind of like... I don't remember.
Jibola would always be like, okay, we got to cut this down. Of course, writers, you're precious about your words, just as artists are precious about how they've done their drawings. If you are like, hey, we should do this another way, there's an art to it. But I found with Jibola that the key for me was, and sometimes actually when you make a point like, hey, this, like, the pacing is off, the scene is too long, sometimes he was 100% correct. But I quickly was like, oh, this is about Jibola not wanting to have to draw for so long. And I'm like, this is what, you're like, this is what the story needs. And so I'm like, yeah, Jibola, you're 100% right. We need to cut this down. But do you think we should cut this part or like this part? And Jibola would be like, well, we can't cut that part. And we're like, we can't cut that part. I'd be like, so, and then, half the time he'd be like, actually, maybe we should add a little bit here. But I had promised him, I was like,
oh,
look, dude,
I see.
when we hand this to Harper Collins, they're going to look at this 300, got to 65 or whatever it was, page, manuscript. And they're going to say, no way, we're not doing a book of this size. It's not going to make sense from a business perspective. So it's like, dude, they're going to have us cut 100 pages at that stage. So like, let's just put in everything we want. And then we can fight to keep the stuff we really want. And we'll have to lose some stuff that, that we don't want to lose, but that we can accept losing. And so we brought it into Harper Collins and they looked at it and they came back and they're like, we have one note. Could you add some pages about Fela's father? And that was like the only note. And Jibola was like, you told me that we were going to lose 100 pages with the editorial process. And they want us to add pages. And I'm like, yeah, but it makes sense though, right? He's like, no, it 100% makes sense. We should add some pages about his dad. But like, that's not the deal, Mendoza. So that was the process through there. But to answer your original question, just really quickly, was I think kind of the reason why Fela is important. Like the reason I wanted to tell this story, obviously I'm not Nigerian. I lived in West Africa for a while in Ghana, Nigeria's neighbors, so I had a bit of familiarity with it. And so beyond the idea that I think this is a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of stories told, at least, and if they are, most, Jibola's talked about this before, but a lot of stories that are talked about Africa or the diaspora center on the slave trade, right? Which is obviously a huge portion of that history, but it's really limiting, right? And it really reduces the African experience to one of like, enduring and like survival. And it cuts out just the day-to-day, the reality that people in Lagos do not live a life that is all that different than they do in London or New York or any other major city. And so the chance to kind of show that was really interesting. But because of what Fela was talking about in his time are still, it's colonialism, fascism, the usage of corporate power, like these things are all relevant today. But I think what makes Fela's conversation so critical is because he did it with humor. He's a really funny, really profane, really mischievous. He's kind of like, he's Loki. Like that's kind of like, he's like Loki and Thor all in one a little bit. And I think that was just the thing. It's just, the reason I was attracted is that is the same way I look at the world. Like Jibola and I, when we were making this book, half our time would just be talking about where the world was, what we think it should be, what we want for our children kind of stuff, and laughing because we have the same sense of humor. And I think it's important. You have to have humor. Fela, this is a line Jibola uses a lot, but Fela talked about how the people in power, when they're using their power negatively, are really just empty suits. And the way you deal with someone who is really just an empty suit is you laugh at them. You laugh at the absurdity, right? And so I think in a weird way,
right,
what Fela was doing and say what South Park is doing right now are like Fela is South Park. Like South Park and Fela would like that is the same, they're coming from the same wavelength. And so if you have any love for that kind of irreverent, kind of sticking a finger in the eye of authority, then this book I think you'll really enjoy, but just dive into the Fela world because I think it'll be really satisfying for you.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I as I was reading the book, I was like, wow, there's like a lot of like just harsh, brash humor, right? And it's great because it's very funny. Like, he's clearly sticking the middle finger to like all these authoritarian types that in the book, and I'm like, surely these guys are like exaggerating a little bit, right? This is kind of like a fictionalized retelling of things. And then I went and watched like most of the Fela Kuti Music is the Weapon documentary that came out a while ago, and to see interviews with this guy, it's like, oh no, this is just who he is. You guys lifted him up from real life and put him into the comic. It's so impressive how you were able to translate that so well, because I think after the first couple of pages, when we see Fela in real life, you're kind of like, oh, this guy has like an attitude, and it continues throughout the entire book. It's amazing. I'm very curious to know how long you guys were working on this book to make it happen, because I was impressed by the source list, right? And I'm like, for 300 and some pages, 380 some pages, I think was like the final book that I was looking at. It seemed like you had to pull out so much. Like, this was the most vibrant human being I've ever heard of in my entire life. How were you able to like condense that down, and how long were you guys working on this to make the book happen?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's why it's 350 pages long.
Yeah.
Condensing was not really a thing we did a lot of. Actually,
well, that's, I mean, like, I think in a part of it, you guys talked about how like, oh, these two scenes actually didn't happen at the same time, so we kind of made them happen here because narratively it made sense. But I'm like, if you would have told both of those scenes, I still feel like I would have been wanting to know more. Like even if you stretch this story out, I feel like there's no page count that could contain like Fela's life in the way that you guys were telling it, or like as he existed even. So yeah, how did you make those choices, and like how long were you working on that?
Yeah, so I started working on it around 2007, 2008, right? That was around the time when I read This Bitch of a Life. And and then I said, watching as many documentaries I could find, reading books about about Fela, but also about Nigerian history, West African history, stories. There are these fantasy stories that my dad used to tell me about when I was a kid. So I went back and read some of those again because I wanted to have some of it appear in there. So yeah, around 2008. And then when I met Conor around 2014, he did a deep dive as well. Started reading a bunch of books. So I would say, yeah, since 2008, and between Conor and I, working together since 2014, 2015. So what's that? Like
almost a decade?
Over a decade.
Over a decade, yeah.
And then I was talking to a friend of mine from university. She was like, "Dude, you were talking about this in like 2006." I was like, "What? I don't remember." So I think what made it rich was that it was just spanned over a long period of time. It was just this labor of love, of we want to jam this story with all these different elements. But without losing people in it, right? So you're not confused. It's easy to follow, easy to understand. Even though it's a place that you don't know much about and you don't have enough context, we try to build that world for you so you do have context and you can follow it, right? So yeah, so that was kind of like the gist of it.
Gotcha. And I guess like Conor, that's where you came in. You were kind of like, okay, here's how we move pieces around, and it went from giving notes to just writing the whole script. Is that how it happened, or was something else?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it really was because Jibola. I mean, so in the book, a key moment in Fela's life. We talked about how he started a country. He called it the Kalakuta Republic. It was a place where he said any Nigerians could come, and so a lot of people did take him up on it. It was a commune, really, for lack of a better term. And that song Zombie that we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation is a song about the military, specifically the Nigerian military, but military in general. And in it, Fela compares soldiers to zombies, right? They have no mind of their own and all they do is destroy. And Nigeria is not dissimilar to the United States in the sense that it is a very large military for the size of the country. And most people would know somebody who was in the military. So Fela attacking the military was a really risky move, because it could have been the kind of thing where people, kind of like what happened to the Chicks, I guess, as they're now called, the Dixie Chicks, right? When they kind of took a stand on something in terms of military industrial power, and it really lost a lot of fans. For Fela, most Nigerians were like, we love, it's kind of like we love the troops, but we hate the fact that they're being sent to war. And that was really much the reaction. So the government was furious. They kind of thought that zombie, here was Fela, he's gonna hang himself. We gave him some rope and he's gonna hang himself. And it didn't work out like that. If anything, he became, like Obi-Wan struck down. He became more powerful than ever, right? Sure. Yeah, that's right. Sure. We worked a Star Wars reference into this. And so they were furious. And so after he sung this song at this big international festival where they had told him, don't embarrass us, they sent 1,000 soldiers to attack the compound. And they horrifically beat the people they found. They assaulted his wives and the other women. They threw his mother, who actually helped Nigeria get their independence from England. She was in the room when the negotiations were being done. They threw her out of a second floor window. She was in her 70s. She was known as the mother of Africa. And so that's what Jibola wanted to focus on. So it was this really key moment. And so having that, I was like, okay, if this is our inflection point, then we need to have, we have to have roughly about half the book getting here, and about half the book that's going to show the effect of this. I don't know if you guys have ever read a graphic novel by Ho Che Anderson called King. It's a bio on Martin Luther King. It's really, really good. But what he does is about halfway through, he shows the assassination of JFK. And until that point in this book, King, it's a very classically structured graphic novel in terms of storytelling and in terms of art. After JFK dies, it becomes a little bit like a nightmare. In terms of the art, panels start to bleed. The point Ho Che Anderson was trying to make is when JFK dies, King loses, even though JFK and Martin Luther King did not always see eye to eye, JFK fundamentally understood what Martin Luther King was fighting for. He wanted him to fight more slowly because, he was afraid of what this might do. But at his core, he was like, I understand this fight and it is an important fight. And he was the guy protecting, MLK from, guys like Hoover who were like, this is a domestic terrorist. We should take him out. And so when JFK dies, the idea is that King has lost this level of protection and that the end is going to come. It is now just a matter of when. And so for us, the Calacuta attack this is where you go from seeing Fela, who is very funny. He's not that he's not serious, but he's always having fun. And after this attack, you see someone who becomes increasingly obsessed with being able to fight the regime on its own terms. And, I think if there's a subtext to this theme, the idea is when you start to become like the people you are trying to defeat, they've kind of won. And so one of the points we make in the book is the idea that Fela becomes a bit of a dictator. He was always demanding, but he became a little bit more of a dictator in terms of how things had to be done and really what he had to be. He went from being someone who would say, people thinking that I could run for president is great for the band because it means people are listening to our ideas, to a guy who was like, I should be president. And so, it's a really, and so that was a lot of it was just, okay, if this part that Jibola's identified is the center of the story, which it was, then it was like, okay, well, how do we lead people there so they understand why this is important? And then where can we take them to show how this changed Fela? And, again, I guess it's this idea of when you have state sanctioned violence, it's so hard to come through something like that and just to be unchanged and to still be this carefree, whatever. I don't care that you did all these horrific things to the people in my life. I'm not going to lose my joy. And in some ways, I think that attack killed a lot of the joy that was in Fela, which is an equal tragedy, to everything else that happened.
Yeah. I think Jibola, you mentioned kind of how, or maybe I heard this in another interview. Sorry, I did research and it's all jumbled in my head now. But the thing that I found really interesting throughout this book, I think to kind of pair with what you're talking about here, Conor, is the fact that the art in the book does change, right? As things get more intense. I think there is line work changes a little bit. And one thing that I found really cool in this book is the color work that happened throughout the story, right? For the various scenes and the dream sequences to the reality of life. And I think as the book goes on, the color work gets more and more, I'm gonna say harsh, I think. So how did you guys work with your colorists on this book, Bolaji Olaye and Ashling Tu, to make that work together with what you guys were trying to portray?
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember this, that there was a pandemic going on at the time too, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, that thing. Right.
Remember?
Right.
And my wife and I had just had a baby, and we had this project. Thanks to Conor, it was 3 times bigger than what I expected.
But
it to
so
be.
much better.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah.
To be fair, so much better. So initially I was going to color it. I wanted to color the whole thing. I wanted to do the whole production, but I had given myself 18 months to complete the whole book. So when I started working on it, I was like, oh man, this is not going to work. I need support. So we were able to bring Ashley and Bolaji to the project, and they both have very different styles, right? Ashling is this really kind of like anime style, right? And Bolaji has a totally different type of style, just kind of more classic, cartoony sort of style. And and I had kind of my own vision as well, right? And I had different inspirations of what I wanted it to be like. So, and we were all in different time zones. Anyway, so basically, I'm going to start talking about workflow, and I apologize, that's not your question.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine.
Basically, the workflow was, draw out the scenes, block out the colors, and just send it out to the team and go, all right, this is what I want. We'll look at some references. Hoche Anderson's King was a good one. Arkham's Asylum was a very good one that we referenced as well. Yes,
okay.
For all those dark and heavy scenes, right? There was also another one, Blue and Green, that's kind of like it's such a beautiful book.
Oh, beautiful book. Yeah.
So we referenced all of that. In terms of just kind of the experience of the reader going through the book was extremely important to me, right? I wanted you, to start in this place that is dreamy and aspirational, and we take you through kind of like a classic graphic novel experience. And as Fela's life becomes more complicated and heavier, we wanted the book, the story and the art to feel heavy. And even if you pay attention to Fela's clothing, it changed throughout as well. It starts off as blue, and then closer to the end, we get the yellows, and we had the red when he was, had become a full tyrant. I think a good reference for me for that one was actually Breaking Bad, when Walter White became Heisenberg. He always wore black, right? But before that, he would just wear just like typical regular clothes, like beige and blues. So I kind of borrowed that idea as well. And I was hoping that the when the reader is going through this experience, they feel like claustrophobic, when Fela feels claustrophobic, and when you're in the dream sequence, you get a little bit of hope and you get a little bit of breathing room again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like this beautiful etherealness to those dream sequences that just really, really hit super well. Like especially later in the book when like he's revisiting this place and he's like, I finally have answers. Like it's so powerful. I don't want to spoil it for anyone out there. I think that's something that's not documented in history. It's added to this book, so you really should go read this if you haven't. Paloma, I'll lead to you. Last question before we wrap up here.
Yeah, this is kind of going in with like the creative process. Is what advice would you have for like either your past selves or like other creators who want to create like a graphic novel biography, or like I need to tell this like real person story?
I mean, I guess Jibola's first influence was don't hand it to the writer who's going to make it 3 times as long. I
wasn't gonna say it. I was thinking it, but I wasn't gonna say it.
I think so we're pretty clear that when we talk about that, this is like a biopic. right? Like think of, your classic Rocket Man.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to bring in Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, because it is actually so
Yes.
well structured. But yeah, I think you at the end of the day, you need to do the research and the homework, and then the real challenge of it is trying to figure out, how can you be true to the story of the person while telling a story that doesn't get bogged down and confusing? Because all of our lives are so intricate, and crazy things happen, and we do the same things over and over again, right? We tend to make the same mistakes. We have the same, and so it's figuring out, how can you winnow that down so that you have a consistent arc. And so sometimes you can get caught up in the trueness of a story. And so I think one of the things that was really good for Jibola and I working together is, sometimes I would have questions or perspectives that are not Nigerian, obviously, and Jibola would be like, oh, like, I never thought we would need to explain that. And then there were other things where it would be like, oh, Jibola, like, oh, this is how it happened. And I'd be like, yeah, but we don't necessarily have to be like held to that. And it's funny, a project I've got coming out afterwards is actually something I wrote with my wife, loosely based on her childhood moving from very, very small town Ontario to just outside of Toronto, and what a massive ego blow it ended up being. And it's the same sort of thing. I think if you're writing a story about someone who's a real person, it's really, really helpful to, at some point, hand what you're doing to someone that you trust who has a good sense of story, because they're going to help you kill your darlings. Because when you're telling the story of someone, you do get caught into like, but that's not exactly how it happened, or this moment. And sometimes you do need someone to come in and be like, they get what you're trying to accomplish, but they can just take a look at it and put together, look at it from a story perspective and say, like, why does this moment have to be here? Because I think you have the same, you do the same thing with this other moment. And I think this other moment might actually flow a little more neatly. You don't have to introduce a character or a new location or things like that. And I think, honestly, like Jibola, when you came to me, I think that's what you were wrestling with, was there was just so much. And how do you start to know, and especially when it's so close to you, right? Like Jibola growing up, just down the street from Fela, him being such a massive figure, I think you get too close to it sometimes. And so that'd be my recommendation. If you're doing a story about someone who, a real person, is find someone who you trust, who can look at it and maybe help you take a few steps back so that you can really see what is the arc of my story, as opposed to am I hitting every single moment that happened in this person's life, because that won't be coherent as a story in the way you probably want it to be.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think the thing that comes to mind for me is that it was really important for it to feel like something that happened yesterday, or something that's happening just around the corner from you, even though this is somewhere you may not know much about, And Fela at the time was also trying to warn Nigerians, right? If you listen to a lot of the songs, he was almost predicting the future, that, hey, if we let these things happen today, we're going to have a harder time tomorrow. And people didn't see it because at the time, Nigeria was actually in a pretty good place. We had the Nigerian naira was stronger than the dollar, right? But we had very similar things that are happening in the U.S. today or not in the U.S. to be fair, but in so many places around the world. Anti-immigrant sentiment was up. There was huge corruption that was happening in the government, and we had realized, these people don't really give a shit about us, right? But generally things were fine. Things were kind of functioning enough, and people were partying enough. So when I was writing, I was like, oh, Occupy Wall Street was happening. The subprime mortgage crisis has happened. They're not the same things, but they're parallels. And I wanted it to feel like, oh, Fela is warning us to not fall into the traps that Nigeria fell into, where you give the power to strong men. And it took us 30 years to come out of that, And I didn't know that, 10, 15 years later, we're going to have a strong man in the U.S. And, you're going to have this anti-immigrant sentiment that is bubbling up, and fascism on the rise. So just make sure when you're telling your story that you make it feel like it's right now, right? So that's my advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you guys put together one of the scariest, most prescient books I've read in a while. So I appreciate you doing that, and for us letting to take a look at it, because it's an absolutely beautiful book. Everyone out there should go find a copy of Fela Kuti, Music is the Weapon, from Harper Collins. I'm sure you can get it at your local comic shop or Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your comics. I'm guessing this is probably distributed. I guess before we wrap up here, Jibola, Conor, anywhere you want to plug where you are on the internet, where people can find you, where they can find more information about the book?
Yeah, you can follow myself on Instagram. That's where I'm typically at, Jibola Studios. That's my handle. And my website is felagraphicnovel.com. That's where you can also purchase the website online, the book online.
Yeah.
And for me, you can find I'm on Instagram as The Real Conor, and then I'm also on Blue Sky, and also the site I still refer to as Twitter as Conor McCreery.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to get all that stuff in the show notes for anyone that's interested. Make sure to just open up your little podcast player. You can click on those links and check out all that stuff. Find a copy of Fela, as well as follow these guys on the internet. But I think that will do it for today's show. I want to thank you both again, Jibola, Conor. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us and chatting comics and talking about this incredible graphic novel that the two of you put out. I guess thank you to Paloma for being here. Thank you to Kait for proof listening. Thank you to Zander for editing this episode. And as we say on every episode of I Read Comic Books, until next time, comics are good, and so are you.